Hi, this is Brian with Blend Marketing. Today we're going to wrap up our 7-part video series on growing revenue through direct bookings, and we're doing it with one of my favorite topics, which is our top tips for a high converting website. We're going to do this in a checklist style, where on the left-hand side I've got the checklist of tips, and on the right-hand side I'm going to show you, in most cases, live websites where we've implemented some of these techniques so that you can see them in action so that it's easier to see what we're talking about. So let's start with the top tip, which is invest in compelling images and videos. We know for sure that video and imagery that are, or video and photos that are done well convert better. We have a couple of examples here in our article about great photography creates more bookings. You can see here that in this top example, switching to the new batch of photography in this particular case resulted in an increase in conversion rate, and also in the case of the advertising, an increase in the click-through rate. And this is when all we did was switch out the photography. We have another client where we did a similar thing. We went from some poor photography to some professional photography. We also redid their brand in the process, and with that combination, we saw a significant impact in click-through rate. Now, click-through rate isn't exactly conversion rate. We are talking primarily about conversion rates today, but the same type of things in these photos that compel people to click are the things that compel people to go ahead and book as well. So invest in good photography. Make sure that you use a photographer or videographer that has shot your type of experience before, if at all possible. The equipment that they bring, the experience that they bring, the angles at which they shoot, all make a difference. And if they have experience shooting zip lines or rafting trips, things like that, it will make a difference in how smoothly things go and the outcomes that you get. So I highly recommend getting somebody who has that experience. Make sure that you are trying to be real in there as well. So as you're taking those photos and videos, don't just pick the cream of the crop. You definitely want to put your best foot forward, but people are looking for an authentic, well-rounded video and set of photos. So make sure, we talk here about have some audio from a guide cracking a joke on a tour so that people get that vibe of like, what does this tour sound like and feel like? What's the experience really like? Don't just show people zipping through the air. Get kind of on the ground, so to speak, and in the position, kind of first person perspective, and show what it's like to be there. Maybe the guests laughing with friends, things like that. So include that as part of your video set as well. Just to show one more example here, this photo was taken for something called Tilt, which is an experience where you tilt out over the Magnificent Mile in Chicago, and it's a thrill ride. And so showing that expression on the person's face from this perspective, also showing the city, that composition was really important. And adding this photo and making some other changes were part of what caused us to get some better results for conversion rates as well. Our next set of recommendations relates to your policies. So one of the things that we recommend is make sure that your cancellation policy is as good as you can possibly make it. So make it as good as your financials will tolerate and your operations will tolerate, and compare to the competition, including TripAdvisor. So here's an example that we came across. This is the same experience from the same tour provider. On their own website, they say that tickets are non-refundable, but if you try to book that same experience on TripAdvisor, risk-free 100% refund if you cancel 24 hours in advance. TripAdvisor understands how important this is to people. And by the way, this was pre-COVID. So this is really important to get right. It always has been. It's even more important today. People want to know that they can make changes if they need to, or they can get their money back and book something else if their plans change. So be as accommodating as you can. As I mentioned, you should compare not only to TripAdvisor, but your local competitors as well. So take a look at how visible your policy is on your website, how strong the policy is, and how strong the policy is on TripAdvisor. And you can give yourself a grade compared to everybody else and just see, has there been any movement in the market? Are people offering a better cancellation policy than we have today? And again, update that and make it as strong as you can. Once you have a strong policy, there are a couple of things that you need to do. One is to use what we call book with confidence indicators or book with confidence messaging. And again, we take a cue here from TripAdvisor and the other OTAs who have invested a lot in getting people to book. So you'll notice that with the OTAs, this free cancellation note shows up all over the place. You can see here that it's on the listing on this page, but if you go as well in a different place where they have full detail about the tour, you can see that they have the lowest price guarantee, reserve now, pay later, and free cancellation right underneath the main description of the tour. And then they also have it right at the decision points where people are deciding, do I want to add to cart? Do I want to reserve? And you can see free cancellation, cancel anytime before, and they give the date when you can get a full refund. So you want to do this same thing on your own website. So you can see here that we've kind of borrowed that same concept, right? So right where people can make the choice, book with confidence, plans can change, we get it. This is another aspect of writing your policies. Be human, be realistic, be empathetic. Help people understand that you are a good company to deal with. You're friendly, you're accommodating. So this tells people right here, right next to that decision-making, that decision button, that they can go ahead and book with confidence and that they're not making a commitment that's going to be difficult to get out of if their plans change. Sometimes your policy might require a little bit of additional explanation. So you can have, in this case, we have a tooltip here and people can read the full policy as well. One really important thing here is make sure that you have a professional copywriter write your policy if at all possible. So I'm giving a real life example here. On the left-hand side is just one that we came across. It says cancellations made within 24 hours prior to tour departure will be charged full tour price. Now, that's a terrible way to word a very good policy. That policy is free cancellation with 24 hours notice. So we rewrote that just as an example here. Plans sometimes change. We get it. It happens to us too. So we're happy to provide a hassle-free 100% refund if you give us 24 hours notice. I haven't changed the policy. I've just taken a more positive posture in how that policy is conveyed. So have somebody else write it if you are not a copywriter or you don't know how to put that positive spin on it, but make sure that it comes across as cheerful, accommodating, and positive. The next tip is to build trust. Now, there are different ways that you can build trust. One of them is to show people that you've done this for a while, right? So we have here millions served, millions delighted. This creates some trust. We also say that we've been delighting guests since 1983. So this gives people an idea that this is not a relatively new company. We've been doing this for a very long time. Additionally, we want you to use the customer testimonials in a multi-layered way. We call it the voice of the customer. So here's part of what we mean by a multi-layered way. I like the aggregated star ratings here. So this is helpful. We always put a count here as well because the count has a big impact on the level of trust that somebody can put in that particular star rating. We, of course, also like to have reviews. A lot of companies get this. This is quite common. One thing that's not quite as common that I like to see, though, is more curated quotes. So you can curate these quotes. Now, here's the thing. Everybody knows that companies can cherry pick quotes, and a lot of companies do. So I think cherry picking quotes can be okay. Exposing those quotes and just saying these are the latest reviews, that's good too. But one thing that there's a couple of different things that you want to accomplish here. This particular hand-picked quote is helpful. Always make sure that you mention the person's name. This says amazing tour. We were taken to all the iconic sites. The reason that you want to hand-pick some of these is you want to help craft that message that you are trying to convey. A lot of your guests will echo the things that you want to say and that you want people to hear. And so making sure that you pick that one out so that that's what people hear, that's important. But one other thing I like to do that serves a slightly different purpose is to pick a very short phrase. In this case, this one's even a little bit longer. We've even gone shorter with some of them. So tilt is a must do. Wow, our hands were sweating, but the experience was amazing. In this case, it's big enough and short enough that with this particular page, probably 80% of people are going to read this. Whereas if you have longer paragraphs, and especially if you have all of these, this is enough. People might skim this a little bit and read a couple of these. But if you actually want to plant an idea in people's heads, grab a short, high impact quote and make sure that that's there. Again, that serves a different purpose than this. This is a quantity and quality thing here with this strip. This is a quantity play for sure. And that really short quote just serves a different purpose. So make sure that you've done that as well. Let's talk about calls to action. All right. So first of all, you want to make these easy to find. When people are ready to take action, you want them to be able to take action. For that purpose, one of the things that we like to do is we like to have a sticky booking bar in a lot of cases. And that's just one that's there all the time. So whenever people have decided, I'm ready, I've got the answers that I needed, I know how much it costs, I know when we want to go at, or I got that last answer to that last question that I had. We want people to be able to take action right then and there. And that's why we have this persistent on a lot of the sites. In some cases, as we have room, we'll even put the star rating here right next to that price as well, just to keep reinforcing that idea that this is a well-reviewed, well-loved tour. And we put that right next to that persistent button. Another tip here is be careful that you don't count on what I call non-traditional next steps. So an example here is FareHarbor. So FareHarbor will create an embed for you, or if you grab your embed code, a calendar widget. Now, this calendar widget has some really good things about it. The live availability, where it says real-time availability and it uses the green to show that there is availability that day, that's all great. But it's not necessarily an intuitive way to take the next step. So I'm not a fan of having just the calendar on the page. I like to have the calendar and the Book Now button. Yes, it's redundant because technically this is interactive. But for the person who's looking for, I'm ready to take action. Now, in this case, I do have a sticky booking bar. You can see the star ratings here. But if I didn't have that, I just don't want anybody to ever have to hunt for that next step. And so they can click on that Book Now button, or if they understand that this is interactive, they can interact there as well. So that's why we decided to keep both of them in that case. The last tip regarding calls to action is to test different words. So Book Now is extremely common, but if you take a look at what the OTAs are doing, and if you look at some of the other things that have been tested, we've tested check availability, we've tested reserve. Reserve is something that's used by some of the OTAs, and we have found that at times, some of these different calls to action do a lot better. The call to action should be really clear, and it should be indicative of what's going to happen when they take that action. So if they click, you want it to connect with what they were expecting. So in the case of, for example, we had a client that was doing some private tours and group bookings. And so their call to action was get a quote. And instead, we tried a call to action where we did plan your event or plan your party, whatever was right for the specific context on that particular part of the page. And those more tailored ones worked better because that idea of planning the event was a better call to action. But definitely do some A/B testing, try check availability, try reserve. Those could end up working really well for you. All right, our next tip here is about a tiered writing format for what I call progressive scannability. And this all has to do with how people use the web. It's easy to believe that if you provide a lot of information, that's going to help people make the right decision. But a lot of times that is not true. People don't read online. People skim, people scan. And we need to design websites that are built for that type of usage. Think about the way that you use the web. There's a very popular usability book by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think. And the whole idea is related to that. Make it really easy. I'm in a hurry. I want to go through this quickly. Don't give me all the information. Give me the information so I can plow through it quickly. So here's an example. There are a couple of different things that we can do. First one I list here is card layouts with images. What we mean by this is you can see that these particular cards make it very easy to see which of these tours is about that suspension bridge, which one is focused on the gardens, which one is focused on wildlife, which one's focused on the city. This is very, very clear, carefully chosen photography. You'd be surprised at how many times the photography doesn't communicate as clearly. People put in an image for their tour that, especially when you put them in a grid like this, they haven't thought through whether there's a clear distinction between the images that communicates to the customer what it is that this tour is about. So we've carefully thought through which images represent this experience the best, and this provides a very quick way for them to skim. It's not just the photography, it's even pricing, its duration, its availability, things like that provide a very quick way for them to scan what we have available to them. Tiered headlines are also important. People don't always go from headline to full paragraphs of text. Again, people skim, people scan. So we have here Upper Pigeon River rafting trip, so there's our primary headline. But then we have a secondary headline which communicates something useful. Pulse-pounding thrills for ages 8 and up. This stands in contrast with their Lower Pigeon River rafting trips, which is not pulse-pounding thrills. So we're communicating something here so that people who are skimming, here's the way I like to think about it. Write your website not just for the person who's willing to read everything. Forget about that person. They probably don't exist. Write your website for a couple of different groups of people. Write it, first of all, for the person who's willing to give you 10 seconds, maybe 8 seconds, maybe 6 seconds on your page to understand what that particular tour is about and why they should consider doing it. Then write for the person who's willing to give you 15 seconds or 20 seconds. Then write for the person who's willing to give you 30 seconds or 45 seconds. And that's going to help you write these for progressive scannability. So you've got your 6-second version of your page. So you're thinking through those headlines very carefully. You've got a very clear hierarchy of information, and you're giving more information as they go down from headline to subheadline. Also, use headings and use bold text wherever it's appropriate. So in this case, we have bold text. So we could have just left this as a paragraph, but by creating this bold text here, this lets them skip it if they're not planning to do a double run. They don't have to read additional information. I like to do this even in bullet points. If your bullet points are more than a couple of words long, if it's a sentence, summarize it in a couple of words at the beginning of each bullet point so that people can look at those bullet points and skim them rather than having to read every bullet point in order to get the information that you're looking for. Help give them that scent of information. Help them understand this paragraph is or is not for you. They're hunting and they're pecking, right? So help them hunt, help them identify which paragraphs matter to them rather than just assuming they're going to read everything and then filter out after that. Here's another good example. So itineraries. I've seen itineraries that are very text heavy. And yes, there are some people who are going to want all of the detail in the itinerary, but this has been written in a progressively scannable way. People can look at just the highlights and just see, okay, we're going to the totem poles, we're going to Prospect Point. They can see this very quickly, and if they want to know more details, they're there. But this serves both of those users really well. And in fact, if somebody's wondering about a particular thing about, say, Granville Island, they can they can find it quickly, read just that part. And so it's unlikely that you're going to have somebody just reading this or reading all of this. That's oversimplifying. It's not just two groups of users. People are going to read this first, then they're going to read what they want as far as the detail. Speaking of detail, let's give one last example before we get into that next point here. Here's an example of where we have these highlights for this particular tour, and there's 8 different highlights. And originally, when we started working on this page, none of the highlights had a headline or a heading. They all just had a full sentence or two in order to describe this. That doesn't give people a quick way to skim. So now they can see that they're going to a cookie factory, right? Again, the image can help reinforce that, but the image plus that headline make it very quick. And now it's very easy for people to see those 8 things. Instead of having to read 8 sentences, they can read 8 headlines along with those 8 images. So make it very scannable. And then if you do have some detail, look, there are times where you need to provide detail, not just because it's something that you know you're going to answer if you on the phone if you don't answer it on your website, but people are looking for it, right? They want to know this information. So just use collapsible sections where possible in order to say, hey, here's the information. If you want it, just click. And now they can click, and don't send them off to other pages all the time. Try to keep some of the information here so that they can quickly dive in and out and continue learning about this particular tour. The next tip is writing for your users. So address them with language like you and your. So here's an example. Instead of talking about what we provide or what we're going to do, we're talking about them. We're talking about their needs. We're using you and your language instead of we and our language. So see how everything works for your friends and family before you decide to climb yourself, right? So that's just an example of the way in which we want to do some of our copywriting. While you're doing that, you also want to address questions and objections. And it's not only through the FAQs. It's sloppy to just say, all right, all of the questions that people have, we're going to throw on an FAQ page. What you're saying then is you want people to read information on a particular tour page. And if they have any questions, you want them to go hunt for the FAQ page, then scan through a list of 20 to 30 FAQs. This is what we see far too often. Instead, address the questions, be empathetic, think about what it is that they want. And so here is an example. We are anticipating here the question of, do I have to climb with my kid? So we have a call out here. Hey, parents, we're talking directly to them. We know our audience. We know it's not the 8-year-olds reading this webpage. We know, well, there might be 8-year-olds reading the webpage on their tablet, but we know that parents are wondering these things and typically the ones doing the research and planning this particular event. So, hey, parents, kids who are 56 inches or taller can climb without a chaperone. We're addressing their specific need, their specific concern, their specific question. As another example, we've got something for everyone, even the scaredy cats. This was really important for this particular company because they built a place for multi-generational adventure. They know that they're trying to draw in grandparents. They want them to know that this is not something that is just for the thrill seekers. It's for the multi-generational families who want to come together. Some people are going to experience thrills. Some people are just going to walk. Some people are going to sit on the benches that were specifically built for people who want to sit and just watch the kids have fun. So we're addressing those concerns right up front. So there are also going to be times where you do have FAQs. So I mentioned, I talked about the FAQ page. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an FAQ page, but I'm saying that you might not need one. What you might need instead is just contextual FAQs. So this, for example, this is Tilt, which I mentioned earlier in this video. So Tilt people have specific questions about this Tilt thrill ride. And so on the Tilt page, we have Tilt specific FAQs. Another way that you could do this is, again, you could have an FAQ page and just list all of the FAQs for this experience. Where should I park? Things like that. That's not what the person who's looking at the Tilt page is wondering right now. So create contextual FAQs and really avoid those long, non-searchable FAQ lists that make people really hunt for those answers. By the way, if a question is truly frequently asked, one of the things you need to find out is there a way for us to provide this information somewhere in the page so that people don't have to find this? This is almost a last ditch effort, right? Like, where can we put information so that people can find it? Just try to weave this information throughout your copy where it's appropriate. We even do some tracking of FAQ clicks for these accordions so that we find out which FAQs are being clicked on the most, and we provide that information to our copywriters so that they can make adjustments to the page if needed. We did talk about thinking about who they are, where they are, and what they're hoping for. Related to this is get ideas from reviews of happy customers and echo back the benefits and emotions, et cetera, in your copy. So this is a really good technique that our copywriters use, where they go into your reviews and they find out what words do people use to express their experience, and using that language, the language that caused them to be excited enough to write a positive review, that language is what your next customer, your next prospective customer probably wants to hear. So use that where you can and create indications of the type of experience that people are looking for, and that they're looking for because people are already talking about those emotions and those particular benefits that were exciting to them. Also, personalize where you can. Here's a simple example. So Highlands Aerial Park is fairly close to Atlanta. It's within a couple of hours of Atlanta. So this is a day trip for a lot of people, and so we will sometimes create a geo-targeted version of pages if we have companies in this type of situation. This is a copy of the homepage, and it's written specifically for the Atlanta audience and delivered specifically to the Atlanta audience. And it's not only through advertising. We're not just pushing, having ads push people to this landing page. We are actually taking that homepage, and anytime that somebody from Atlanta tries to land on it, we are redirecting them instantly to this page so that this is their homepage experience. Escape Atlanta for a mountaintop zipline adventure. So we're already speaking directly to them. And then we do things, just little things like, we love Atlanta and the feeling seems mutual. And now we have Atlanta-based users who have left a review. So they can identify with this person, right? In this case, it's worth the drive from Atlanta. Having somebody from Atlanta tell me that it was worth the drive is something that is going to really be compelling for me if I'm in Atlanta. Another thing we do here is where we talk about the directions, we specifically say it's less than 2 hours from Atlanta. We give them trips for traveling from Atlanta and things like that. And we can give them specific directions about how to easily get here from Atlanta, all of those types of things. It's just an easy way to personalize. The way that we're doing that is through Google Optimize, where Google Optimize can detect about where that user is located. And that's how we're doing that redirection. There are other ways you can personalize too. For example, if you have a groups page and you don't have the budget or the time to create different pages for different groups, at the very least, one thing you can do is if let's say you're doing Girl Scout advertising and you send them to the groups page, you could swap out that image. If they came from that campaign, you could swap out the main image for a Girl Scout image. That's just another simple example of personalization where possible. Next is make pricing clear. This one's really easy. We're not fans of hiding pricing. So make that pricing as upfront as possible. I like to see it nice and large so that people aren't having to hunt. But sometimes the design dictates a little bit of a smaller price, but in this case, it's very nice, upfront, and clear. You also need to select a booking engine with good usability. So this one is, I know that switching booking engines isn't easy. It's just something that has to be in your consideration set when you are selecting a booking engine. So here's an example of one where I think the initial experience isn't good and could slow people down. The last thing you want is to slow people down. All of these tips are about reducing friction, right? Address the concerns that are already in their mind. Make sure that they're not hunting for something that you can make evident, an answer to a question or a price or something like that. In this case, you take a look at this and they have some issues with the first, the start of this booking process. First of all, they list the particular date 4 times here. So February 25th, here, 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 and here. And then there's this search box that says keyword. I'm not sure exactly what that would do. I'm not sure why I would search a calendar when there's a date picker up here. So that's confusing to me. The word available looks kind of like a button. And I believe for a while it wasn't clickable. It is clickable now, and it actually does allow you to go to the next step of the process. But there's also this book now wording, which doesn't look like a button, but if you hover over it, it actually is a button. There's also availability, which is confusing because isn't this showing me availability? So there's just a lot of things here that should be simplified. So I want a booking engine that is a good partner and that is doing a good job of getting, doing the science behind, easy checkout usability. So just as an example here, this is, I don't even know what booking engine this is. This isn't even a client of ours. This is just an example of where you can really simplify this, where it's very clear where to click, right? I can just click here and then I can easily click on a time. And if I want to go to evening times, I don't have to scroll through here. I can just click evening. They scroll for me and I can pick 5:20 and continue. By contrast to what we saw earlier, there's just so much less confusion about what I should be clicking on. These are just small examples, but you also want modern payment methods. Can people pay by Apple Pay or Google Pay, for example? Do they have a reasonable number of fields, or are there way too many? And some of that might be on you. How many questions are you asking people throughout the process and so on? So think about, obviously, the usability of checkout. That's not the main focus of this particular video. This is mostly focused on your own website leading up to the checkout process, because in most cases, tours, activities, and attractions are dependent upon a third party. Next, discount codes. If you're going to have a discount code, it's nice to make it easy to use. So in this case, Old South Carriage Company has a discount code for Early Bird. And we actually have a button here that does the copying for them. You can copy that code, and now it's on your clipboard, and they can continue browsing. And when they check out, it's there on their clipboard. They don't have to copy and paste, deal with, did I get a space in there or anything like that. So nice and easy. Of course, you've been hearing a lot more recently about the importance of working on your site speed. So you want to use two of the tools that we like to use are GTmetrix. You can run a test there, as well as PageSpeed Insights from Google. This will actually tell you about your core web vitals. So run your site, run different pages against these tools, and make sure that you're addressing any major issues with speed, because this can have some minor impact on your search engine rankings, but primarily you just don't want people to get impatient with your website. That's the focus of what I'm telling you now. That's why I want you to work on this, is really for the user experience. Next, we want to prevent dead ends, but we don't want to overwhelm people. So this is one situation in which we actually had some conflicting opinions internally when we asked people, hey, let's put together some of our favorite tips for a high converting website, and we solicited input from different team members. One team member said, make sure that there's no dead ends. Make sure that if people get to the end of a page that wasn't for them, that you've got like another tour for them to click on and investigate. That's solid advice. Another person said, don't put so much information in front of them. Just like when you're on a tour, focus on that tour. Try to get them to book that tour. And if they want to go somewhere else, let them use the navigation. And there's some solid advice there too. So the balance here is provide good flow throughout your website, looking to avoid any dead spots, but don't overwhelm people with choice. You might be familiar with the paradox of choice, which that concept is coming out of an old study. I don't know how old it is now, but it's a study where it was proven that if people have too much choice, they get paralyzed and can't make a decision. So you don't want to do that either. In this particular case, if people are looking at this tour, it's a fairly straightforward laid out page. So, it's got some nice imagery. It's got some really easy to digest tour highlights. It's got that itinerary that I showed you earlier that's easy to scan, but you also can get more information. And then lastly, we give them a choice. Do you want to upgrade your tour? This is a way for them to save some money and get multiple experiences in case they were wondering, is this a tour I should do or should I do a different one? So this makes sure that they have something else to look at. And in many cases, we'll actually have a link for them to view more information about that additional tour, for example. Related to dead ends, and this is a slightly different concept, but there's this concept of dead clicks. So Microsoft Clarity, you might be familiar with Hotjar. Microsoft Clarity is a free tool that is quite similar to Hotjar in many ways. It gives you heat maps and things like that. One of the things that they offer is a heat map for dead clicks. So you can find out places where people were trying to click and it was a dead end in the sense that they wanted to take a certain action, they tried to take a certain action, and they couldn't. Now, that might sound like, how often does that happen? But we had a large client that has a lot of volume that had some issues in their site where people were trying to click on something and they couldn't, nothing would happen. And it was a significant problem. Because people tried clicking in the wrong place almost as often as they clicked on the right place. And this is when they were going through the checkout process. So that's something that you want to identify and fix. So Microsoft Clarity is a free way to help you identify some of those dead ends. Next, and actually last, is mobile here. So I want you to design for the realities of mobile browsing. So in this case, back when mobile phones became so prominent, and until even recent years, a lot of responsive web design was, well, let's take all this information we've got on desktop and just wrap it so it's in this tall, skinny column. But here's the problem. This particular site, I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see this a little bit more closely. This particular site has a lot of activities, and they also have events and races and different things like this. So if they're going to show all of their categories of activity, or all of their different activities, you had to scroll past, what is this, about 1, 2, 3, about 4 viewports on your phone before you got to the next category, which is their events. That's a lot of scrolling if you're looking for something other than these activities. So if you have multiple categories of things, one thing that we like to do is use these swipers instead, or also called carousels. So here we have their list of activities, so you can scroll through that horizontally. But if you're not interested in that, you're already at the next section, which is events. So you don't have to scroll. You don't have a bunch of stuff in your way. So we just have to understand what the mobile experience is like. And remember, people need to get to that next section. So we're big fans of using this type of element. And another thing that you can do to prevent excessive scrolling and help people scan more quickly is consider using multiple columns. This isn't quite as common, but if you have room, if you have just a small amount of information for each of these cards, consider going with multiple columns in order to have higher information density so that people can get through the information faster without excessive scrolling. And that excessive scrolling can cause people to sometimes get lost. All right, so let's talk about, I do have a section here about test and evaluate, but that was really the focus of the last video. So if you're curious about some of these things like A/B testing and heat maps and usability studies, take a look at part 6 of this video series, and we go through that in more detail. All right, so I want to end with the primary principle of empathy. So if you empathize with your user, a lot of these things are going to fall into place, even if you're not an expert. So if you're putting yourself in the shoes of your customer, you're going to be writing copy that is focused on the customer rather than you. You're going to write positive, friendly policies. And they're going to feel like they're catering to the customer rather than just protective of the company. You'll be speaking about them and their desires and their benefits rather than wording it in a way of how you're going to deliver it for them. You're going to address their desires and their concerns early. You're going to think through questions like, oh yeah, what about bad weather? Is this too intense for my kids? What if I need to cancel? Do my kids need to be chaperoned, like we looked at earlier? So if you think like a user, you're going to be able to address those concerns up front. And if you have trouble empathizing and thinking through, look, we all deal with the curse of knowledge. If you've been at your place on the operator side for a long time, it can be hard to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. It's really important though. So if you struggle with it, have somebody else do it for you, or just get some friends and family. Say, hey, hop on the website and tell me, what am I missing here? What am I not answering well? Or what's not compelling to you? Just make sure that you're getting a customer's perspective. Another thing you can do is test the website yourself to make sure it works smoothly. Test all kinds of different paths. What if I'm trying to book a group event, right? What if I want to find my photos? What if I'm looking at maybe doing a package deal? What if I'm looking for a coupon code? Anything that people are trying to do on your website, make sure that there's a smooth path. And lastly, you're going to see how people use the site. So we talked about heat maps before. You're going to want to do that because you're going to want to see, am I serving people well? Are they running into problems? Are they getting confused? Is there anything I can do to make their experience better? So I hope that this checklist of tips was useful to you. I hope the examples really helped it connect for you. And I wish you well as you work on optimizing your website experience to get more bookings.